Content warning. This audiobook contains strong language, sexual themes, supernatural elements, and graphic depictions of death. The author recommends this work for audiences aged 18 and over. If you let your 6-year-old listen, that's on you. Dark Matter, The Order of the Hidden Cross, by Ian Bailey, published by Ashlar Press. Copyright 2025. Chapter 10. Caius and Flavius. Their torches flickered wildly, their faint flames battling the oppressive darkness. Shadows danced erratically across the damp, crumbling stone walls, as if synchronized. The air was damp, laced with the scent of mildew and the faint tang of something metallic, something very wrong. The silence that filled the corridor was palpable. Flavius cautiously proceeded down the corridor, his heart pounding as he followed Caius further down the passageway. They hadn't been here in what felt like an eternity, but the unease had returned, more pronounced than ever. Caius walked ahead, his confident stride reduced to measured steps. His shoulders, usually squared with purpose, were hunched slightly forward. Flavius couldn't miss the tension in his movements, nor how Caius's hand hovered closer to his blade than usual. The ancient iron door loomed before them, its surface etched with faint, jagged marks that seemed to shift in the torchlight. Rust clung to its jagged edges, but the air around it hummed faintly, like an unseen force pulsing in tandem with their heartbeats. It felt alive, waiting, holding its breath as though aware of their presence. Flavius felt that familiar, gnawing dread crawl up his spine, a memory of the last time they'd been here whispering in the back of his mind. He tried to suppress it, but the unease clung like a shadow he couldn't shake. His grip tightened around his blade, just as it had before. "Just like last time," Flavius muttered, his voice barely audible. "I can feel it. Whatever's in there, it seems to be getting worse." Caius didn't respond straight away. He paused, staring at the door, his jaw tight. "You're imagining things," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. A sudden crack shattered the silence, sharp and hollow, echoing from behind the door. Flavius froze mid-step, his breath catching in his throat. The sound was followed by a low groan of strained metal, as though something heavy stirred just beyond the barrier. Both men froze. Flavius's hand instinctively reached for his blade, while Caius's eyes darted to the door. The sound had come from inside. "It's waking up," Flavius whispered, his voice trembling, betraying the cold sweat trickling down his back. He gripped his blade a little tighter, its hilt slick against his damp palms. The door rattled slightly, just once, enough to remind them both of the power hidden behind it. The ground beneath them trembled, barely noticeable, but enough to make them glance at each other, their fear now unspoken but shared. "Do we report this?" Flavius asked. Caius hesitated, then muttered, "We don't leave our post, Flavius," his voice low, barely audible. "But stay sharp. Something's different tonight." But even he knew this time was different. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Something had shifted, and they both knew whatever was behind that door wasn't just stirring, it was waking, and the fragile barrier between them felt thinner than ever. Chapter 11. The Order of the Hidden Cross. Yehoshua of Nazareth was dead, or so the world believed. Sealed in a cold, dark tomb, his mutilated body lay shrouded in silence, while his followers scattered like dust before the wind. But the stillness was a lie. Beneath the stone, something stirred, a shadow of a truth so dark, so damning, it would demand centuries of blood to conceal. Joseph of Arimathea stood outside the tomb, his hand trembling as he clutched the iron key. The heavy stone had been rolled across the entrance days before, sealing away a body and the truth. He had watched the man hang on the cross, had seen his blood soak the earth beneath him. Yehoshua had died, of that Joseph had been certain. But now something else gnawed at the edges of his mind, a whisper that wouldn't leave him. When the stone was finally pushed aside, the sight that greeted him dropped him to his knees. Yehoshua wasn't dead. He wasn't alive either, not as they had expected. Yehoshua's body was a grotesque shadow of its former self. His once olive skin had taken on a sickly shade of white, entangled with the unforgettable bluish-gray shade of death. His lips now cracked, dried blood settling around their edges. His wounds, wrapped in linen, oozed a thick, blackened pus, mixing with the dried blood that had long ago clotted but never fully healed. Punctured by nails, his hands were curled inward, stiff and gnarled as if he were still gripping something invisible. His chest barely rose with each ragged breath, the sound of it wet and phlegmy, a grotesque rattle that seemed to scrape against his throat. Beneath his eyes, dark purple bruises stretched like shadows across his gaunt face. His eyelids occasionally fluttered, revealing bloodshot eyes that seemed too heavy to fully open. Still, when they did, they glistened with the sheen of delirium. There were moments, fleeting and almost imperceptible, when his body shuddered violently as if reliving the agony of the torture he endured. A low, guttural moan, almost inhuman, escaped his lips, but it was faint, so faint Joseph had to strain to hear it, and when he did, it sent a cold shiver down his spine. Joseph staggered back, the stench of decay thick in the damp tomb air, clinging to his skin like an accusation. He had expected the healer, the teacher, the man who had walked on water and spoken of love with divine authority. What he found instead was a broken shell, trapped between death and something unspeakably worse. The sight unraveled his faith, one fragile thread at a time. It wasn't a resurrection, not in the way the scriptures foretold. There had been no divine spark, no heavenly choir. This was something else. Yehoshua was alive, yes, but barely. His skin was cold to the touch, his eyes sunken. A great shudder passed through his body as if it had come back from the grave with pieces of death still clinging to it. Joseph recoiled, unsure of what he was seeing. "Lord," he whispered, his voice breaking in the cold night air. What is this?" But there were no answers, only weak breaths and the terrifying knowledge that what lay before him was neither a man nor a god. The resurrection story would soon sweep through Jerusalem like wildfire, but only a handful of souls would know the truth. Over the next few days, as Yehoshua lay hidden in a cave, tended to by Joseph, this strange story of resurrection began to emerge. The disciples, who had scattered in fear after Yehoshua's crucifixion, returned to Jerusalem only to be confronted by these strange rumors. Whispers spread through the city that Yehoshua had risen from the dead, just as he had foretold. Some claimed to have seen him walking the streets, his face aglow with divine power. Others swore they had spoken to him, touched his wounds. At first, the disciples dismissed the rumors as wild fabrications, stories born out of grief and desperation. But as the stories persisted, they began to wonder. What if it was true? What if Yehoshua really had returned from the grave, defeating death itself? The pressure from the crowds, the growing myth, became too much for them to fight. And so, reluctantly, they embraced the story. He is risen. In reality, Yehoshua had not risen in the way the rumors suggested. He had not ascended to heaven in a blaze of glory. He was hidden away, recovering from the torment of crucifixion. His body was weak and broken, but his spirit, his divinity, remained intact. He was alive, but not for the world to see. For the disciples, it was easier to let the people believe the myth. It gave them hope. It gave them strength. And so the story of the resurrection was born, a convenient lie to keep the faith alive. While whispers of Yehoshua's miraculous return to life began to spread, Saul of Tarsus found himself on his way to Damascus. A zealot and a man known for his vicious persecution of the early followers of Yehoshua, Saul was determined to stamp out their blasphemous teachings. Saul had been on the road to Damascus, his heart filled with hatred, when the first rumors reached his ears. "The disciples are going to try to kill you on the road." But Saul, ever the cunning strategist, heard something else hidden beneath the stories, the thread of a secret he could use, that Yehoshua was still alive. Saul arrived in Damascus under the guise of a convert. He claimed to have had a divine experience, a revelation that had changed his heart. None other than Christ himself appeared to him, giving him the specific task of starting his church. But those who truly knew Saul and had witnessed the cold steel of his eyes understood that the man's ambitions ran far deeper than religious fervor. The disciples, wary of Saul's reputation, were not easily swayed. Peter, James, and John all rejected Saul, sensing something false in his words. The man had been hunting them not long ago, and now he wanted to join them. It felt wrong. They sent Saul away, refusing to accept him and his story. But Saul was undeterred. If the disciples did not believe him, he would take matters into his own hands. He began to track the rumors, following the whispering crowds, until he heard something that piqued his interest. A tale of Yehoshua, still alive but hidden. That was when Saul's true plan began to form. Saul returned to Jerusalem, still pretending to be a convert. He sought out the remnants of Yehoshua's followers, bribing informants and threatening those who kept the secret. Eventually, he found what he had been looking for, Yehoshua, hidden in a tomb, alive but barely clinging to life. Joseph of Arimathea, who had given Yehoshua a resting place after the crucifixion, had been secretly tending to him, keeping him hidden from the world. He found Joseph of Arimathea in the dead of night, his face hidden beneath the hood of a cloak. "I've heard whispers," Saul said, his voice low and dangerous, "whispers of a man who should be dead but isn't." Joseph's blood ran cold. He had done his best to keep Yehoshua hidden, to protect him while his body slowly recovered from its ordeal. But Saul's presence here could mean only one thing. The secret had leaked. Someone had talked. "It's true, then," Saul continued, stepping closer. "He lives." "Not as you think," Joseph replied, his voice trembling. "He was. It was an accident. They thought he died. He wasn't resurrected. He wasn't brought back by God. He had never really died." Saul's eyes glittered with something far more dangerous than mere interest. "That's what makes it even better, Joseph. If they believe he conquered death, then his followers will grow. His message will spread. But if the truth comes out, if they know it was just a mistake and he just survived, everything falls apart." Saul's mind worked quickly, faster than Joseph could keep up. He saw the opportunity, the power that could come from controlling this narrative. Yehoshua's supposed resurrection could be the spark for something much larger, a movement, an empire. But Yehoshua was now a liability, a fragile piece of flesh that could ruin the divine story. Saul of Tarsus stood over the motionless body of Yehoshua, his hand trembling as it gripped the blood-stained dagger. His heart raced with a mixture of triumph and terror. He had plunged the blade deep into Yehoshua's side, sure that this would end it, that the heretic who claimed to be the Son of God would finally meet death like any mortal man. And yet, as Saul stared down at Yehoshua's still form, horror began to dawn upon him. Yehoshua had not died. Blood poured from the wound, but it wasn't the vibrant red of life. It was a thick, almost tar-like substance, darker than it should have been, congealing even as it left his body. Yehoshua's muscles twitched involuntarily, his body spasming as if trying to react to the violence it had endured. His eyes, still half closed, flickered, but they did not focus on anything, glazed like a man lost in some nightmarish fog. The gaping wound Saul had inflicted on his side revealed flesh that should have been healing by now, but instead it festered, swollen and inflamed. His skin stretched tight, grotesque over the edges of the puncture, almost as if the flesh itself were pulling away from the wound, recoiling from the blade. Yehoshua's breath hitched, a gurgling rasp escaping his throat, and a thin stream of blood mixed with saliva trickled down his chin. The tomb echoed with the sound of Yehoshua's agony, a muffled, guttural groan, as though the weight of death clung to him but refused to claim him. His body, pale and cold, lay limp but alive, trembling as if every nerve was still alight with the torment of crucifixion. Saul stood frozen momentarily, staring at the black blood pooling beneath the Messiah. It smelled of rot, the sharp tang of iron mingling with the unmistakable stench of death. But Yehoshua, impossibly, still lived. This man, this humble carpenter who had wandered through Galilee preaching love and forgiveness, was something far more than Saul had ever imagined. He was no mere prophet. He was something far beyond human comprehension, something terrible and eternal. Yehoshua was a god, trapped in human form, and death had no hold over him. Saul's heart thundered as realization struck with cold precision. He had failed. The blade that had felled countless men had merely wounded Yehoshua, leaving him trapped in a grotesque limbo. The blackened blood pooling beneath the Messiah carried the stench of death. Yet he lived, clinging to life with a force that defied logic, nature, and Saul's will. This was no ordinary man. This was something beyond understanding, something Saul could neither kill nor, up until now, control. Panic surged through Saul's veins, followed closely by fury. He had staked everything on this act of betrayal. Everything. If Yehoshua continued to live, if word got out that Saul had failed, everything he had planned would fall apart. And worse, if Yehoshua rose again, if he regained his strength, the world would know Saul's true intentions. He could not let that happen. But Saul's mind had always been sharp, calculating. He was nothing if not adaptable. His greatest strength lay not in brute force, but in manipulation. If he could not kill Yehoshua, he would find another way. A way to control him, to imprison him. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to think. He had to act quickly, but not rashly. His initial plan had failed, but there was still an opportunity here, an opportunity far greater than Saul had first realized. Rather than being a failure, Yehoshua's survival could become Saul's greatest weapon. His eyes darted toward Joseph of Arimathea, who stood frozen in the corner of the tomb, watching the scene with wide, terrified eyes. Joseph had witnessed everything: the knife, the blood, Yehoshua's strange, unnatural survival. He knew the truth, but he was no zealot like Saul. Joseph had always been compassionate, a man who followed Yehoshua's teachings with a quiet dignity. He could be manipulated. Saul turned toward Joseph, his mind already weaving a new narrative. He wiped the dagger clean on his cloak and stepped closer, his voice cold and commanding. "Let them believe he rose," Saul said, his voice sharp with conviction. "A divine ascension will inspire faith like nothing else. But the truth stays with us. We'll keep him where no one can see, not alive, not dead, but ours." Joseph recoiled, his eyes wide with horror. "Keep him? What do you mean, Saul? He's alive. This is the Messiah. We cannot keep him imprisoned like some animal." Saul's lips curled into a cruel smile. "We must, Joseph. Don't you see? His presence, his true presence, will destroy everything. Suppose the people find out that Yehoshua did not conquer death. In that case, their faith would shatter if he simply survived through some accident of nature. They believe in a resurrection. They need to believe in it. If they learn the truth, it will all come crumbling down." Joseph took a step back, shaking his head in disbelief. But Saul, you tried to kill him. You stabbed him. And he lived, Saul hissed, his eyes narrowing. Don't you see? He is too dangerous. Yehoshua's true power is beyond our comprehension, beyond anything we can control. If he ever recovers, if he regains his strength, he could undo everything we've worked for. No, Joseph, we will hide him away. We will make sure that no one ever sees him again. Joseph's face paled. He looked down at Yehoshua, lying helpless and wounded on the cold stone slab. The man who had been their teacher, their hope, was now little more than a shell of his former self. His breathing was shallow, his body weak. There was no sign of the godlike figure the people had come to worship. But Joseph still saw the humanity in him. He couldn't go along with Saul's plan. He couldn't let this happen. I won't do it, Saul, Joseph whispered, his voice trembling. I won't be part of this. This is wrong. This is blasphemy. Joseph's hands trembled as Saul's words echoed in the cold, hollow chamber. The tomb had once been a place of silent reverence, where the broken body of Yehoshua lay in the throes of death's grip. Now it felt suffocating, like the weight of all creation had been placed on Joseph's chest. His breath hitched, his eyes fixed on the motionless figure of Yehoshua, barely alive, barely human, yet unmistakably divine. He could still remember the day Yehoshua spoke to him, his voice filled with compassion and quiet authority, his words carrying the weight of a truth that could heal nations. Love thy neighbor as thyself, Yehoshua had said. Do not be afraid, Joseph, for the kingdom of God is near. And yet, here Joseph stood, watching the very man who had healed the sick, comforted the broken, now reduced to a fragile shell. Was this truly the Messiah? Could he allow this divine being, this hope for the world, to be imprisoned? His heart pounded in his chest. Every fiber of his soul screamed for him to kneel beside Yehoshua, to cradle his broken body and protect him from the evil that now stood before him. But then there was Saul. Saul, whose cold, calculating gaze held no warmth, no light. His words carried the weight of a threat Joseph couldn't ignore. The dagger gleamed in Saul's hand, still slick with Yehoshua's blood, a blood that had flowed too freely. Saul had failed to kill Yehoshua, but Joseph knew he wouldn't hesitate to kill someone else. And if Joseph stood in his way, the next dagger might find his own flesh. Do you really want to die, Joseph? Saul's voice was soft now, almost kind, but the venom beneath it was unmistakable. Do you want to be buried here, forgotten by the world, just like him? Joseph's heart pounded, each beat a hammer blow against his resolve. Loyalty warred with terror, his mind spinning with the impossible choice before him. He saw the path of betrayal stretch out like a scar, a future where his cowardice stained Yehoshua's suffering. Yet martyrdom loomed just as grimly. If he defied Saul, who would shield Yehoshua from the darkness coiling around him? Who would protect the Messiah if Joseph became another lifeless body in this tomb? If Joseph died, the last of those who truly cared for Yehoshua would be gone. And Saul would win. He felt the weight of Yehoshua's presence beside him, lying helpless on the cold slab. His breathing was shallow, his body broken. Yet there was something else, something unyielding in the man's stillness, as if Yehoshua's spirit was waiting, biding its time. Joseph clenched his fists. The Messiah was alive, but for how long? Saul would see to it that Yehoshua's suffering never ended. For a brief moment, Joseph wondered if Yehoshua could hear them, if the man who had walked on water, who had commanded the storm to cease, still had the strength to hear their plans of betrayal. Could Yehoshua sense the conflict in Joseph's heart? Could he, in his divine awareness, understand the torment Joseph faced? What do I do, Lord? Joseph's thoughts screamed in the silence of the tomb. How can I betray you like this? Joseph, Saul's voice cut through the darkness, harsh and insistent. We're running out of time. Decide now. Will you help me, or do I bury you alongside him? Joseph's gaze flickered to Saul, then back to Yehoshua. His lips trembled, but he spoke no words. He didn't need to. The answer had already formed in the cold, tight grip of fear. I will help you, Joseph whispered, each word tasting like ash in his mouth. Good, Saul replied, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face. Then we are agreed. Yehoshua's resurrection will be our truth, our story to control, and no one will ever know what truly happened here. But as Saul turned away to begin making arrangements, Joseph lingered beside Yehoshua. His heart was heavy, his mind swirling with regret, shame, and a small flicker of defiance. He couldn't leave Yehoshua like this, bound in the shadows, hidden away from the world. No matter what Saul said, Joseph knew he had to do something, even if it was small, even dangerous, perhaps. Joseph stood over Yehoshua, watching as the blood pooled beneath him. The smell of decay clung to the tomb's walls like a living thing, and for the first time Joseph felt the full weight of what Saul had done, what he had allowed. He could feel the bile rising in his throat, the bitter taste of guilt mingling with the stench of death. How had it come to this? He knelt closer, drawn by a force he couldn't explain, as if some part of Yehoshua's suffering pulled at him. Joseph could see it in Yehoshua's eyes, the dim awareness of pain, the slow, helpless blink of a man too weak to even turn his head. His once strong hands, hands that had blessed children and broken bread for the multitudes, now lay shriveled and limp, useless. Joseph's heart ached. Yehoshua had once radiated life, a quiet, gentle strength that could calm storms and heal the sick. But now he was a broken vessel, his body a grotesque parody of the divine light he once carried. And Joseph had helped to imprison him. A faint, raspy breath escaped Yehoshua's lips. In that small sound, Joseph could almost hear the unspoken words, "Why have you abandoned me?" In that brief moment of stillness, Joseph made a silent vow. "I will not abandon you." He couldn't defy Saul openly, not yet, but there would be small ways to resist. Perhaps he could find herbs to ease Yehoshua's pain or whisper words of encouragement into his ear when the guards were gone. Perhaps there were hidden allies within the city, other followers who could help Yehoshua escape this fate. He didn't know what the future held, but he wouldn't let fear be his master forever. Joseph stood and, for the first time, met Saul's gaze without flinching. "I'll help you, but I want to be the one who tends to him. No one else should be near him." Saul frowned but shrugged, dismissing the request as inconsequential. "Fine. Do whatever you need. Just make sure he doesn't get any stronger." Joseph bowed his head, concealing the flicker of rebellion in his heart. "As you wish." "Good," Saul said, his voice dripping with cold satisfaction. "Then we are agreed. The people will believe that Yehoshua has risen, that he had ascended to heaven in triumph. But we will know the truth. We will keep him hidden, weakened, forever." And so the Order of the Hidden Cross was born, a brotherhood forged in shadows, lies, and blood. Saul's ambitions drew men as ruthless as himself, Roman soldiers, Jewish Pharisees, and Sadducee collaborators, traveling practitioners of dark arts, occultists who had delved into the mysteries of life and death, all seeking ways to control him. Together they would form an unholy alliance bound by a single mission: to keep Yehoshua hidden, imprisoned, and powerless. At first they tried simple methods, herbs, wines, anything to keep Yehoshua sedated. But as his strength slowly returned, Saul realized that Yehoshua, even in his broken state, was far stronger than any man. The feeble potions they used to dull his senses were not enough. They needed something more substantial, something more ancient, more powerful. And so the order scoured the lands, searching for witches, shamans, and healers who understood the deepest mysteries of the human soul. They gathered the knowledge of forgotten empires, experimenting with dark alchemy and forbidden magic. Over the centuries, they perfected their craft, creating a powerful potion that could keep even a god in a state of near death, a concoction that would keep Yehoshua's mind clouded and his body frail. As Yehoshua lay hidden in a secret chamber, deep beneath Rome itself, Saul of Tarsus, now calling himself Paul, began to spread his new vision of Yehoshua's message. But this was not the message of love, compassion, and justice that Yehoshua had taught his disciples. No, Paul's gospel was one of control, of obedience, of submission to the divine authority of the church, his authority. Paul's teachings became the foundation of what would grow into the Roman Catholic Church, an empire built not on Yehoshua's true teachings, but on the lie of his resurrection, a resurrection that had never truly happened. Paul was not a convert. He was the first Antichrist, a man who had glimpsed the truth of Yehoshua's power and chosen to twist it for his own gain. His letters, his travels, his influence, they all served a single purpose: to establish a church that would control the minds and hearts of billions for millennia to come. All the while, Yehoshua remained hidden, his body broken, his mind clouded by the dark potions of the order. The world believed that Yehoshua had ascended to heaven and that he sat at the right hand of God. But in truth, the man they worshipped as the Son of God lay in a forgotten cell, kept alive by the very men who claimed to serve him. As the centuries passed, the Order of the Hidden Cross grew in strength and secrecy. Their methods became more refined, and their influence became more insidious. Popes, kings, and emperors all fell under their shadow. Any who sought the truth were silenced, and those within the church who grew too close to the secret were dealt with. Even popes were not safe. Some who had dared to question the true history of Yehoshua were quickly replaced by the order, ensuring that the lie would continue unchallenged. The Catholic Church, the largest and most powerful institution in the world, stood as a monument to Paul's grand deception. The world worshipped Yehoshua as the Son of God, never knowing that the man they revered was kept sedated and hidden from them, his true message of peace and justice twisted beyond recognition. The Order of the Hidden Cross remained vigilant even today. They controlled the church, not from the pulpits or the altars, but from the shadows. Their influence was vast, and their knowledge of Yehoshua's true fate was passed down through the centuries, through whispered rites and forbidden texts. The world would never know the truth, not if the Order had anything to say about it. Beneath the Vatican, in a chamber cloaked in relics of forgotten empires, the man they called Christ began to stir. His frail, broken body shuddered, the ancient potions that had clouded his mind weakening with each passing hour. In the suffocating dark, Yehoshua's thoughts sharpened like blades, cutting through centuries of fog. A promise kindled within him, faint but unyielding. He would rise again. Somewhere in the depths of his soul, Yehoshua remembered. He remembered the promise he had made to his followers, that one day he would return, and as that promise stirred within him, so too did his strength. The Order knew the day would come when they could no longer contain him, and when that day came, they would face an impossible choice: let the truth be revealed, or destroy him once and for all. This chapter may have ended, but the story doesn't. Return next Monday for what waits in the dark. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and leave a comment to share what the shadows may have whispered to you.